That's the book of Judges. Shannon, we have a handout. Thought you might want. There you go. So don't you guys like the way he does that with the little drawing thing? Isn't that cool? I like that. And it does a great job in a very short amount of time just covering the entire book of Judges. And, I'm sorry? Every one of them, huh? Yeah. So I like those. And yet, I mean, it's just a summary. But hopefully that helped you as we dive into this book. And it is very disturbing. It gets worse as you go along. And so you might ask yourself, then, why do we want to study this, And I threw out a question last week, or maybe it was the week before, because we're going to talk about things like the different practices in the Canaanite worship, the worship of the god Molech, and child sacrifice, and idol worship, and things like that. And I said, well, we're living in the 21st century. We don't struggle with things like that today, do we? Oh, yes, we do. And we'll examine those things as we go along. And it is going to be frighteningly familiar as you look at these things as they take place. But I don't want to get to that yet. But anyhow, I hope you enjoyed that. One thing that we get when people who are not really studying the entirety of the scriptures, and they begin, say, reading Book of Judges, and they look at God and say, oh my, this is so violent, and how unfair, we like that. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago. How unfair it is, that God picked these people, and he kicked these other people out of the land and gave it to the people he selected. It just seems like it's unfair. How fair is that to kick these people out? Well, does anybody remember what we came up with last week as we talked about this? I mean, is that unfair of God? Is that unjust of God? These people are living there peacefully in their land, and God says, hey, you guys over here, you come in and kick these people out and take over their land. Is that unfair, or is it not unfair? How come? That's really bad. She's had a change of opinion here.
That's why it wasn't unfair, because they weren't living in their land. They were doing evil and moral.
Exactly. Do not look at the Canaanites as innocent people. Do not look at them as just very peaceful villagers living out their life in tranquility, and all of a sudden these Israelites come and put the whooping on them, They are grossly wicked. And there are several passages. I'm going to read one to you out of Deuteronomy to give you some background on this, and try to get an idea of the times, because the times then are really, really, really bad. Ours are bad, but not nearly as bad as that, but we're heading that direction. And I don't mean any one particular location. I'm just saying culture in general. And I can only speak to Western culture. I'm not familiar with anything in the Eastern culture, but I'm guessing it's somewhat the same. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, Moses writes this: after the Lord your God has driven them out before you, speaking of the Canaanites, has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. So there's another thing to clarify here. It's not that Israel was more righteous than the Canaanites. No, it's on the account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you're going to take possession of the land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations. The Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God has given you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Okay? 3 times he mentioned this in this text. Don't think it's because you're good, that you're more righteous. But rather, I'm using you as basically a tool of justice against this wicked, grossly wicked, totally corrupt people. But let me ask you a question that seems fairly obvious. Isn't one wicked people being replaced by another not righteous people? What's the difference? And that's a good way to put it. The one group's going to turn around, or the one group is God's people that he's working to become a holy nation. Remember how he drew that on the first thing? That he is going to be in covenant relationship with these people. I will be your God, you will be my people. And he's got an entire book, if you will, an entire Bible, the Torah, to lead these people from being unholy to being holy, from being unrighteous to being righteous. He's got a plan for this people. So they're not supposed to take on the way. That's why they have to kick them out. So you don't take on the ways of these people. I'm going to make you into a holy people, a different people, my people. And then he's got the cult worship of the tabernacle and the sacrificing of animals and all the things that they need to do to become righteous and remain in this right relationship with God. Right? That's the difference. But what happens? They fail. They fail. And in the book of Judges is there are some victories, but it's mainly about failure and about how Israel fails to stay close to God, fails to listen to God, fails to live within the boundaries that God has given them. And if that is not a sermon for any day in humanity, nothing is. So Judges is as relevant as this morning's newspaper. And we have no lack of wickedness around us. And especially as we look to the church, and by that I mean the church universal, and how we're supposed to be a holy people. Anybody find that Bible passage where it talks about us being a holy people? Anybody know where that's at? Go ahead and somebody find it and we'll read it. But this conquest that Joshua has died, he's handed off the baton now to who's he handed the baton off to? Samuel. And then Samuel's going to be bringing the king and on and on. So you can see that it's kind of neat that at the death of each one of God's special leaders, his whole movement doesn't fall. Moses dies, he gets Joshua. Joshua dies, Caleb, Samuel, King David, and it progresses on. But anyhow, this conquest is more of an act of justice than just saying, hey, you're my people, I'm going to give you some territory, here it is. And so Israel was the instrument of God's judgment on this very corrupt people. But the parallels I want to show is they're supposed to be a holy nation. We as the church are supposed to be a peculiar people, a holy nation. Right? Anybody find it there in 1 Peter yet? Okay, somebody find it. And so let me get a couple other passages here to show you just how wicked these Canaanites were. Another one's over in Leviticus. I don't know if I want to read all of this because Don, even though Leviticus is his favorite book, we probably don't want to spend a whole lot of time in Leviticus. Right, Don? Yeah, it's his favorite book. But in Leviticus 18, I'll just say this. It gives some very specific reasons and some identity about these people, the Canaanites, beginning about verse 6, it starts doing all these different sexual relational regulations. And the reason why is because these were the practices of the Canaanites. And God is giving out some prohibitions about it. One of the things is, one of my favorite ones is this. Have you ever heard in Leviticus the prohibition against cooking a young goat in its mother's milk? Haven't you ever wondered, well, what's the big deal with that? What's the big deal with cooking a young goat in the milk of its mother? Well, it all has to do, and I won't go into detail because I want to go into detail later about Canaanite worship and fertility worship and child sacrifice and things like that that they were into. I mean, you think, who could sacrifice a child for some social reason, right? Well, it happens every day. We call it abortion. Actually, we have to change the vernacular. We call it choice. It's even now healthcare. It's called healthcare. This is healthcare. And for what reason? It's, unrestricted sexual behavior is what it comes down to. And so there's no difference. And I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail about this, especially in the area of the DNA. We used to call it DNX, the dilation, partial birth abortion, and all this stuff. There's the familiarity between the two, and the parallel between the two back here in Judges and today is frighteningly familiar. But we'll get into that more as we go along. So anyhow, in Leviticus, where we're talking about this people that's supposed to be holy, this is how they're holy. They're separate. They're not like the people around them. And so how is it that, using the same, we're going to focus just a little bit on this child sacrifice and abortion, and how is it that the church has been sucked into this current belief? Well, we call it something else. I would never do abortion, but it's not my choice. So we become pro-choice. It's not my choice, but it's their choice. Well, there's no difference. All that does is one of the worst things to do is when good people are silent. When good people are silent, when they don't stand up for what's right. And you know me, I don't get into a lot of politics. I don't get into the social issues. That's not the point I want to get into. What I want to get into is that which is after God's own heart. And God created life. He knit us together in mother's womb. We were created in His image. This is not a political issue. This is a godly issue. And when you think about what was happening in Nazi Germany during World War II, and the atrocities that Hitler did, the church was very silent. Very silent. Cannot just stand by when these things take place that affect that which God loves and that which is holy and special. So it is very relevant. And we'll get into that more specifically as we go into the book. But that's what Leviticus covers. Also back into Deuteronomy, over in chapter 18 and verse 9, it says, "When you enter the land the Lord your God has given you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire." Now, there is a direct parallel with this child sacrifice. So this is what they were doing. And it's just hideous. And you'll learn some ways of the Canaanites and Molech worship. He also talks about practicing divine sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable practices, the Lord, your God, will drive out these nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. Okay? The nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. So, if you want to look at this, and this is so dark and so evil. One place you can look to that's still very dark is Haiti and the practice of voodoo. And there's a lot of parallels between the practice of voodoo and that dark, black, magical religion and the fear that's surrounding it. And I mean, we kind of play and make fun of little voodoo dolls, and you pick your favorite person you want to stick pins into and stuff. But they take that stuff serious. And they live in a world of constant fear and darkness and black magic and things like this. This was Canaan. And God is sending his holy nation to purge that and not to become like them, but to be different. We live in a dark world. Let's bring the application here, okay? We live in a dark world. God says to us, I want you to be a peculiar people, a holy nation. I don't want you to be like the peoples around you. I want you to be different. I want you to be like me. Okay? I want you to take on my character and not take on the character and the trait of the people around you. Did anybody find that passage? What's that? Yes. Yes, I know Vera. I'm not going to put her on the spot to read it, but I'll read it for her. So over in 1 Peter 2, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of what? Darkness into the wonderful light. Okay? Once you were not a people, but now you are a people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. It is absolutely the story of Israel going into the promised land. And once you were not a people, now you are a people. Called you out of darkness into light. You're to bring the light. They failed. They failed. And we don't want to fail. And thank God we have the Lord Jesus Christ to enable us to stand, to the power to be victorious over the darkness. And so yeah, this is extremely relevant. It's not just something that happened back in, the time of Caleb and Samuel. There's really, other than, the way that they did it, no difference than some of the things that are going on today. Yes, Connie. In Judges? Oh, 1 Peter. You want to read it? Okay. Yeah, another absolutely wonderful passage. And so God calls the church, us, to be holy, even as he is holy. And so I wonder if we really understand the concept of holiness. And so as Don, who's reading through the Bible, he comes to me, he's like, man, Leviticus, really? Really? That's just a rough book to read. A lot of repetition, right? What is it all about? It's about this process of holiness. We really need to grab a hold of what it means to be holy. And it doesn't mean legalism. See, when we become a Christian, God has us ready-made for heaven through Jesus Christ. Then there's this second work of sanctification that some people dub it, but really it's the process of holiness, of becoming holy as he is holy, becoming more God-like, becoming more of the nature and the character of God as we continue to grow. And so that should take place every day. We should be getting more and more like him. So thank you, Connie. That's a great passage describing how that process of holiness takes place. So now that takes us back to Judges again, chapter 1. And I just want to summarize chapter 1 and 2 really quick, and then we'll be off to the races with these different judges. But 9 out of the 12 tribes of Israel fail to win victory as they're coming into the land. And we looked at those last week, I believe, of the different nations that came in. But 9 of the 12 failed in completely driving out the enemy. They capitulated. They caved in. And that was to their own regret. And so, they need to drive the enemy out. And again, here's a great application. You can't just partially come into Christ. You can't just partially say, I'm going to be a Christian. I'm going to have one foot in Christ and one foot in the world. That won't work. We need to be totally in. And one of the problems that these guys had was there was no unity. There was no real strength in any tribe. And so, the weakness of the tribes is seen in verse 3, where they're trying to get some help of some other ones, and they had limited success on that. But if they had worked together in unity, they had been much stronger against a common enemy. So, again, the parallels, the application. We as believers need to be one and not fussing and fighting over a bunch of little things that can divide, but let's look at what unites and let's work together. Did anybody notice anything interesting about verse 12 last week? Peter did, and I didn't bring this out. Who's an awesome reader here? Don, you'll read it nice and loud, won't you? Chapter 1, verse 12 in the book of Judges. Keep going. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, so you have Caleb. And what is Othniel's relationship to Caleb? No. So, yeah. Othniel is the son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother. I'm sorry. So Caleb is Othniel's uncle. Okay, so you got that. So who is Asa's relationship? Who's his father? Caleb, right? So what relationship does that make Othniel to Asa? Right? So they're cousins, right? Is that right? So you got Caleb and Kenaz, who are brothers. One has a son, one has a daughter. They marry, and they're cousins. Well, is that an issue? Well, it's an issue in our laws today, isn't it? Well, here's the thing, and we know that there was a lot of close proximity in marriages throughout the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, I don't find it anywhere in the New Testament where it is prohibited, where cousins marry, but I know it is in our laws. Yeah. Well, this whole brother thing sometimes, like I would call, like Kent my brother, but he's not really my brother, but I would refer to him as brother. The Old Testament, they did that a lot as well. And so there is some ambiguity that may be possibly looking at as a brother as in a fellow, just what's the word I'm looking for? But not a maternal or paternal brother, but just like Brian's my brother, spiritually speaking. We're kind of together that way. So that may be the case, or it is the fact that they just married very close within. Matter of fact, can anybody think of somebody who married their sister? Huh? Abraham. But was she really his sister? Stepsister? Half-sister. So it was his sister had a common father, but not a common mother. And so, so he when he was telling people she's my sister, was it a total lie? No. But it was a half lie, right? That's right. A half truth is a whole lie, isn't that right? So anyhow, we do see some interclose marriage in the Old Testament, which is no longer something we do today. But there may be some ambiguity there in the language, but we don't know. We don't know. So don't get too tripped up by that, because that's the least of the concerns in the book of Judges. That's the least of the concerns when you see what goes on here in the book of Judges. Okay, I've run out of time, but study Othniel. We'll look at him next week, and the angel of the Lord at Boikim, and then Ehud. We'll probably even get clear up to Ehud next week. I'm not sure, but we'll see. But we'll cover a lot of territory in Judges, because there are more judges than what we'll cover, because some of them are just there for a really small time. I like how the author brought out some of the main characters, Othniel, Ehud, Jephthah, Samson, and those guys. So we'll cover it pretty quickly, but probably a big part of the time we'll study the culture of these pagan religions. It's frightening. Thank you.